Good afternoon. My name is Mariel Gadou. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Psychology. And today, I hope it's all right, I'm actually going to share two statements. The first is my own, and it's intended to provide some context for the second. The second is a statement that I'm going to read on behalf of a Cal community member who wishes to remain anonymous. The topic of these statements is the following principle of community, which is the topic of today's hearings. We respect the differences as well as the commonalities that bring us together and call for civility and respect in our personal interactions. Okay, so my statement. During Free Speech Week, I had a chance encounter with some students in front of Sproul Hall. It was late at night, and I was biking back to lab to fix a problem with some data that hadn't uploaded properly. As I passed Sproul Hall, I noticed that there were some undergrads who were tearing down signs from the front of the building. Hesitated for a second, but then my inner GSI kicked in, and I stopped. I said, "Hey," I called out, "why are you taking down those signs? If you don't like what someone's saying, you put your own sign up or graffiti it or something, but don't take down other people's signs." This is how I met the Berkeley Patriot. The kids stopped and looked down at their shoes. It was clear to me that I had interrupted some kind of mischief, though I certainly did not appreciate the scale of it until much later. "Why are you taking those down?" I asked again. Silence. "Hang on, did you guys put those up?" Vigorous nodding. "Like, to take a photo or something?" More vigorous nodding. "And now you're taking them down to make it look like someone else did?" Less vigorous nodding, but honest nodding all the same. I said, "You guys are like some kind of political group or something like this?" "Yes," said one after a pause. "We're conservative." They all looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I said, "Okay, I know conservative people. But not the kind you might think," another piped up. "Like, for example, I'm a vegan." I said, "Hey, that's kind of cool. I'm a vegan too. But what are you guys doing? What are the signs for? What are you up to?" "Are you going to Free Speech Week?" they asked, looking at me with their sort of shiny college kid faces. "Of course I'm not going to Free Speech Week," I said. "Why on earth would I do that?" "We want Milo to come to campus," said the vegan. "We want a debate." At this point, some student reporters with cameras showed up. I was left speaking with the vegan. Let's call them Jesse. Spoke with Jesse for about 5 minutes, and Jesse told me that it's hard to express conservative political views at Cal. "It's not just a Berkeley problem, obviously," Jesse said. Jesse pointed at one of the others. "That person over there? They were beaten unconscious by Antifa about a year ago." "Wow," I said, "and they're still doing political activism?" "Yeah," Jesse said. We chatted for a few minutes more, mostly me asking questions about the different student organizations on campus and whether or not they talk to one another. "They don't," Jesse said. We exchanged email addresses. I said, "Let me know if you ever want to talk about campus political stuff. I'm interested in understanding." Monday's hearings were centered on the topic of registered student organizations, and one of the suggestions that arose from the commission was the idea of asking student organizations who are hosting major events to perhaps submit, along with logistical information, a statement of intention and a statement of expected impact on the campus community for their major event. After Monday's hearings, I contacted Jesse, and I asked if they would be willing to write a statement explaining the intention and expected impact that the Berkeley Patriot would have stated if the group had been asked at the time. Jesse said yes, as long as they could remain completely anonymous. It seems natural that Jesse and the other students I met last night should be here participating in this conversation right now. After all, none of us would be here probably if it weren't for them. But they're not here, and maybe this is out of shame, which would be understandable, but it may in part be out of genuine fear for personal safety. Due to the negative consequences of the events, I think most people have assumed that the group's intentions were malicious and hostile, a plan designed to harm and disrupt. But my chance encounter with the individuals suggests otherwise. To be clear, I do not condone what they did. But I do think that understanding their perspective is critical for the discussion that we're trying to have. These were college kids who decided to do something extreme. Were their actions wise or responsible? Absolutely not. Were they disruptive, obnoxious, and deeply inconsiderate of other people? Yes, they were. Did they act from a place of malice and hatred? I don't think we know enough to say. So without further ado, I will now read my second statement. Not my second statement, an anonymous statement from a member of the Berkeley Patriot. Okay, so again, this is not my statement. To be clear, I'm reading this on behalf of somebody else. I do not personally endorse any of these views, but I'm sharing them with you in the spirit of these hearings. I can't represent the group. I can only represent myself. But here is what I can say about the intention, says Jesse. The whole point of inviting Milo to campus to speak was to demonstrate that the community's values are toxic. The whole point was to get the community to self-reflect. The UC Berkeley community is so worried about self-reflection. Their ideas are founded on emotions, not on logic. One of the main arguments for why Milo shouldn't come is that he's a provocateur. And he is. I accept this. So then your question is probably, why would we let a provocateur speak? Well, Jesse asks, why would we let a comedian speak? To entertain us. What happens when a comedian's jokes are all terribly bad? What happens when we are not entertained, but instead provoked? Do we ban unentertaining comedians? Who decides if they are entertaining? Who decides who gets to speak and who doesn't? Why should anyone have that power? When you boil it down, the core of this kind of argument is that feelings are more valuable than logical words. The problem about feelings is that you can never measure how people feel, you can only take their word for it. But what happens when people discover that they can exaggerate and dwell on certain feelings in order to get certain power? The group hoped that inviting provocative speakers to UC Berkeley campus would facilitate a debate. A debate is always conducted on the grounds of logic alone. Consider the difference between these two sentences. I'm offended by what you're saying. Shut up. I'm offended by what you're saying, and here's why I think you're wrong. With the former, disagreement results in silence. Silence creates division and often only intensifies the emotion. But saying, I'm offended by what you're saying, and here's why I think you're wrong, invites dialogue. It is only through dialogue that one can understand the motives behind one's speech. I discovered this firsthand. I once met someone whose ideas were completely alien to me, but whose intentions were identical. We all want the world to be a better place. We just don't know how to do it, and so we try different things. By identifying our common intentions, we were able to re-articulate our disagreements and discover how much we really agreed. We were able to communicate. We were able to empathize. Is that not our highest goal? To connect with people on the deepest level so that we can coexist in peace, to understand one another and no longer fear one another. After all, how do you expect to change a person if you do not understand them? How will you ever change the world if you cannot change a person? So this is my statement of intention, says Jesse. Statement of impact is harder. We weren't sure what would happen. The only reason that it cost so much money is that people are violent. We brought Milo to show people what they're doing, that they are protesting instead of debating. We hoped that the impact on campus would be to encourage a change in behavior. Looking back, I can see that that was idealistic. All of this was already there. It's not something that we created, we just showed it. We showed that people would rather protest than debate. And that is the end of this anonymous statement by a member of the Berkeley Patriot, again, the organization that brought Milo Yiannopoulos to campus and precipitated Free Speech Week. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for the speaker? Thank you, Marielle. Next speaker.
I can go. My name is James Eckhouse. I'm the president of the International Youth and Students for Social Equality. We are an extreme left Trotskyist organization on this campus. We represent a minority political position on this campus. We completely reject the new major events policy that has been established by this university, which we see as inherently anti-democratic and frankly a ridicule of free speech. We believe these proceedings are being done behind the backs of the UC student body, and we ask quite concretely, if these issues were actually put up to a vote of the student body, what would happen? How would the proceedings of what has changed with this new major events policy be different? Let me concretely speak to this issue. The new major events policy on this campus shifts free speech from a right to a privilege. In the email that was sent out to advertise this event, I believe the language that was used in discussing free speech was our obligation to free speech. I would ask ourselves to look in the mirror on this question. Is free speech an obligation? Is that how the university sees it, an obligation? Or is it a basic political right of all students on this campus? I side with the former. This past semester, we scheduled an event. I received an email from the police department, or someone I think speaking for them, essentially telling us that this had been labeled a major event. I immediately sent back several questions, which at no point did I ever get any response to. The reason why our event was labeled a major event was simply because of the speaker we had invited out, a man named David North, who is he's the chairman of the most widely read Marxist website. And he has different and perhaps you could say controversial political views that are in a minority on this campus. By asking our student organization to be financially responsible for any kind of potential police involvement that is deemed required, what is happening on this campus is making it the case that instead of free speech being a political right, it's a privilege that can only be afforded to those who, like myself, have more extreme political beliefs if I have the cash to pay for it. We are a penniless organization that certainly does not have the cash to pay for it. I would ask, what happens in the long term if the capacity to hold a controversial political event on this campus becomes tied to one's capacity to finance it personally? That is a destruction of the right of free speech. I think the prompt for this event said something along the lines of, where will the money come from? We live in the richest country in the world, in the richest state in the world, in one of the richest places in the world. I don't mean to hold individuals in this room or the specific administrators of this campus as being, fully responsible for this, but we obviously are in an incredibly privileged place to go and finance these things. We believe, the IYSSC, the organization that I represent, that the way forward to ensure free speech on this campus is to guarantee it as a right, as a political right not tied in any way to one's particular finances. And I would lastly conclude by saying that this should be brought up as a point of political debate and vote by the entire student body, as opposed to something that's largely conducted behind closed doors with yes, these commissions and whatnot to voice community concern, but ultimately the decision is not within the students' power. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? Great, thank you.
I'm wondering if by your interpretation are obligation to provide for free speech without a financial burden on the group would extend outside of the political realm, such as for entertainment, like comedians, other high-profile speakers. Would there then be a similar obligation to provide for any security necessary, despite the financial capabilities of the group?
I can't speak for, I haven't really thought through, quite honestly, the question of how it relates to issues that don't have to do with political content. So I'm not in a full position to talk about that, but I think that insofar as you're trying to have an event on campus that is largely for the students of UC Berkeley, and the intention of the event is not to make a profit, but to educate and share a perspective, whether it be cultural or political or whatnot, by making that student group responsible for, let me put it more pointedly, to make, I mean, this is maybe where, perhaps this answers your question. To make, for example, my student group financially responsible for someone else disagreeing with me is an abrogation of free speech. There's other left-wing organizations on campus, for example, Students for Justice in Palestine, which have gotten into various conflicts, I believe, with the university and other groups on campus, as there are right-wing organizations. And it will be, and I would just lastly say this, we're living in a time of increasing political, social, and economic turmoil. And UC Berkeley, as the kind of originator of the free speech movement, is an example, sets an example, not simply nationally, but internationally, for how public institutions go and deal with the rise of more extreme viewpoints while we're witnessing this turmoil in politics around the world. And so what happens here, I think, actually has quite a big effect globally.
Could we maybe just clarify the issue of the financial responsibility of registered student groups for security costs of events under the major events policy?
Do you want to take that or do you want me to take it? Okay. So under the major events policy, student organization is responsible for internal security that would normally be required for any event. And if there happens to be disagreement outside, that cost actually is borne by the campus.
Okay, so you're saying that there's no financial burden on student organizations for providing security for their event.
No, they are responsible for normal internal security. So in other words, Zellerbach Auditorium requires that you hire a police officer for its event. You would still be responsible for that. But if there was a threat outside Zellerbach Hall that was presented by other parties, the UCPD would provide that security at no cost to the student organization.
Gotcha. Okay, that's helpful to be clarified. Thank you.
Next speaker. Don't all stand up at once. Well, chairs, do we have a speaker? Go ahead. If you could sign in.
Well, it's good to see some friendly faces. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bradley Devlin. I'm the president of the Berkeley College Republicans. Coming today to clear the air a little bit, I've prepared a few remarks, and you're going to hear it here first. I might agree with the Trotsky fan a little bit, so we're gonna see how this goes. After requesting to be a representative of this panel via email and receiving absolutely zero response from this commission or university, I figure it's time to delve into the history between my organization and the university. My peers involved in the Berkeley College Republicans are continually accused of being xenophobic, transphobic, homophobic, racist, fascist, reactionary, bigoted, sexist, and just pure evil. Just yesterday, I was called a Nazi while tabling on 3 separate occasions. Somehow, my conservative values of limited government and individual freedoms have been construed with a fascist ideology that is the antithesis of conservatism itself. However, the leftist students on this campus have a knack of rewriting history in order to fallaciously cast this conservative minority into their own version of Dante's 9 layers of hell. When the Berkeley College Republicans were hosting Ben Shapiro in Zellerbach Hall after the university made that space available to us, there were individuals openly calling for our condemnation because us, being Republicans, don't want members of marginalized student groups to have access to the services located around Zellerbach Hall. That includes this building, the Multicultural Student Center, Cesar Chavez Center, and I'm sure there are other ones that I'm unaware of. This is the precipice of insanity. I have no intention when I'm holding events to shut down half of the campus and make the university fork out $600,000, but you know who has an interest in that? Antifa. In the year 2015, BCR hosted Ben Shapiro on campus with 0 mandated security and a 0 fee, even though I believe we paid for two off-duty police officers. But after the election of Trump, even bringing Ben Shapiro, a conservative who does not openly support Trump and did not vote for him in the general, cost the university $600,000. And the election of Trump is an important point because one of my friends, Mitch Horn, who has now transferred back to the University of California, Berkeley, spent his first semester of this year at the University of Virginia after he was punched in the face on the night of the election after expressing happiness for the election of Trump and line for Artichoke's Pizza. So this was the exception prior to Trump's election. Trump's election occurs, people want to resist and act out, and the attacks have become much more palpable and much more routine on my club. Ben Shapiro is a Harvard-educated lawyer. He went to UCLA as an undergrad. He has the largest conservative podcast on iTunes and is a role model for millions of young conservatives. Bringing him to campus is educational. The intent was educational. Shifting the blame to conservatives with consistent cries for students saying you should know better removes the legal and moral obligations to protect free speech on this campus. Now, I know we've gone over many times the free speech laws, but it's always good to remind ourselves of this. Nadine Strawson of NYU Law, in front of a congressional committee to free speech, says that free speech in the abstract is easy to defend, but it gets much more difficult when we hear something we hate. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes shared this sentiment. We must protect the ideologies we hate in order to ensure we can espouse our own. Violations of law are much different. Hate crimes and other infractions of robust free speech are not a binary choice. We can uphold law and order while encouraging equality. The appropriate answer is more counter-speech, not red tape and legislation to censor ugly views. The SPLC, ACLU, Heritage Foundation, they all agree with Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who in his famous Whitney versus California opinion in 1927 said, if there be a time to espouse through discussion the falsehood and fallacies to avert the evil by the processes of education, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence. Free speech is not the enemy of racial and social justice. The courts have held consistent and bipartisan standings on the issue. So the court holds that free speech cannot be limited because we revile its ideas. This is the principle of viewpoint neutrality, and speech can be punished when clear targeted harassment to cause imminent and reasonable fear. These terms are legally defined by genuine threat or targeted harassment, and these terms are intentionally narrow. Because the element of intent is crucial within these conversations of legalities of free speech. If the rhetoric intends to create a reasonable fear and threat, there does not have to be proof of intent to act on it. Law exists to prosecute on this front. We don't need more of it. Rhetoric is responsible for violence when it explicitly calls for it. See our friend Yvette Falarka for more information. Give her a Google. That's always a good time. Also, the Washington Post suggesting that we should start throwing rocks at the alt-right, even though we may revile its ideas. So thank you very much for that brief moment. Any questions?
How do we promote counter-speech or a culture of counter-speech on UC Berkeley campus? I mean, I agree with you that it's we should be making efforts to try to facilitate dialogue amongst diverse student groups who hold different political viewpoints. So how do we do that? Does it happen already? I'm a grad student, so I don't know anything about anything.
Right. Well, first, what was your last name? Gadoo? Is that am I saying that right, Miss Gadoo? Mariel? Okay. Well, thank you first for giving that statement anonymously for that Berkeley Patriot member. I don't have any ties to that organization. I can't speak on behalf of them, but we really do appreciate that. I think a culture of counter-speech can be made available if we are empowering our law enforcement in order to protect those rights. A fun fact is that, well, not really a fun one, but 19% of my generation, college-age students in the United States, believe that violence is permissible to shut down free speech. That's going to take the action of university administrators and the university police department in order to ensure that we have a safe area for us to engage in dialogue. If you do not feel safe in that area of dialogue, you're not going to be able to engage in counter-speech. So continuing to uphold law enforcement, uphold our principles, our American principles that I think most of us can agree on. The semantics used is what we disagree on a lot of the times. So that I think is a huge way to continue to promote counter speech culture.
Thank you for your comments. I have a question, first of all, about the Shapiro event. How would you characterize or assess the security that the campus provided for that event? If you had to give it a grade in terms of what was provided by campus, how would you assess it in terms of the presence of police to minimize or mitigate violence on campus?
Again, I think Ben Shapiro said this in his speech itself. I think I worked closely with Police Chief Margot Bennett in ensuring the safety of that event. It is a shame that it was $600,000. That's not something that we wish for this university. I'd much rather have that going towards chalk in my classroom or a better PowerPoint projector. But what we're looking at now is I believe the major events policy is looking at mostly giving unbridled discretion, which the DOJ has said in the major event in their statement of interest into the lawsuit against my organization's lawsuit against the university. That unbridled discretion for university administrators is what makes it a problem. And this was ruled in Forsyth County. Rudra, do you know? Forsyth County versus National Socialist Party, where if you're using the content of speech in order to impose larger security fees, that is unconstitutional. So while we do appreciate the administration for ensuring that security because it is necessary, continuing to empower law enforcement and not give unbridled discretion in order to silence minority viewpoints, ideological minority viewpoints, such as the socialist friends we have in the back or the Republican Club.
So I'm just going to follow up again. You were saying that to continuing to be able to give the administration should continue to be able to give security or provide security for events so there can be unbridled expression. And so is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing? That the university should continue to provide security, police presence and security to allow unbridled expression of perspectives or viewpoints?
I think that's necessary, and also, but we also have to draw the line of whether that security is being charged on a content neutral basis. If these things are happening with viewpoint neutral regards, if we're creating time, place, and manner restrictions in a viewpoint neutral manner, that isn't against the Constitution. That isn't undermining our principles of free speech. Ideally, I would like to have as much free speech as possible. However, I can't go out there with my megaphone at 2 a.m. Up in Piedmont and start making some noise. How
would you advise the university in terms of the fiscal context we're in, where there are not unlimited funds, there's not an infinite supply of funds to operate, and allowing as much free speech as possible, but also not going bankrupt to be able to cover the cost? What would you advise the university?
Right. I think that one time. What can we say? Funding the Ben Shapiro event in the way that it happened. I have 3 events on the calendar. I have an event next week. 3 conservative women are coming for a conservative women in media panel. We have not received a single threat of disruption. I have an event on March 7th with Dave Rubin and Heather McDonald titled "Are We Killing Free Speech?" I have not received a single threat on that event. Dennis Prager is coming on March 13th. We have submitted all the proper documentation for these events, by the way. Some of that documentation is still pending. However, we have not received threats for any of these events. I have come back with UCPD. They have not said that there is any mandatory security. I also am in contact with these speakers and saying, hey, listen, if you want to have security, you're going to have to fork out that money yourselves because I have limited funds as an organization and the university isn't going to be covering that if they haven't replied back with a UCPD mandate on security. So empowering law enforcement one time has really gone a far way thus far. Hopefully we can continue to do the same as we move towards move through 2018.
Any further questions for the speaker?
Good afternoon, Matthew Smith. I'm a conservative student on the panel. I think I'm probably the only conservative. I don't want to speak for everybody else, but
God bless you.
But do you feel like you can speak in classes and people will respect your viewpoints? They don't shut you down in a classroom, when you want to argue with a professor about their ideas on how to solve problems. You know, like when you're talking about fiscal conservatism, are you able to voice your opinion in a classroom?
I am personally, I'm going to try to not make this sound like being a jerk. I have the self-confidence to do so. I am incredibly blessed to have that self-confidence in order to speak up. However, that's not the same for every conservative student. Every conservative student will come back to me and say, you know, I wrote my English thesis on Hitler's rhetoric because if you read Mein Kampf, it's very, very contradictory. It doesn't make any sense. You can't have Hitler arguing that Jews are the greatest threat to society and saying that their lives don't matter whatsoever. So when they're writing that paper and they come back and give a good analysis on this evil, disgusting piece of rhetoric, and they come back with a C, and the professor tells them, listen, I really liked your paper. It was definitely a B+ paper, but I didn't really like the topic. I just had a really hard time getting through it because it's just so vile. Because the content of Hitler's writing was so vile, and we can all agree on that. That's where the problems come in, because we need to have those conversations on what evil people did in order to create movements like that. We have students all the time who come back and say, listen, I wrote this poli-sci paper with a neo-realist perspective, with a conservative perspective, and the GSI has marked us down. Every single time I hear that, I go, challenge it with your professor. I have a good working relationship with the poli-sci department chair, Eric Schickler. He has been incredibly helpful with this. My first paper I ever wrote in college was in my poli-sci 5 class with Professor Amy Gurwitz, and my paper leaned more neo-realist perspective, and my GSI gave me a C. I challenged it with the professor, and Professor Gurwitz came back with a B+ paper for me. So there are ways that we can reach out with the university. It's just encouraging conservative students to take those steps, and that's why my organization is here. That's also why I encourage GSIs to be as fair as they can in grading, and to confront your own ideas about the world while grading these papers.
But then, answer one more question. The other thing is, with Trump winning the election, myself, I was pretty disappointed in our candidate, just because right from the get-go he said really horrible things about John McCain, and I'm a veteran, and I really just flat out from the get-go. And then it was just one thing after another, him talking about different our neighbors to the south, and saying horrible things about these different people. And then he wins, and everyone's really upset. And it feels like to me, was that other group that she brought up, and was the Berkeley College Republicans spiking the football by bringing these speakers at such a time when people were upset about who won? Were you guys, because it felt like to me, it feels like it was a spiking of the football. Like, hey, we won, and now we're going to shove it in your face by bringing these speakers. Was that the intent?
Given, I can't speak on behalf of the Berkeley Patriot, given that was a second attempt to bring Milo, I feel like that was more of their cause. Our cause in February for bringing Milo Yiannopoulos. Milo Yiannopoulos was on what he called himself the dangerous faggot tour, and it was 100 college campuses that he was going across the United States for free. Something that you don't know about these conservative speakers, they come with a high cost. I often have to bring in organizations to sponsor these speakers. So when I have YAF's approval to bring a speaker, I have to talk with them, coordinate with them, see who's available to come speak. So once the Milo Yiannopoulos event was shut down, YAF got involved. We attempted to bring David Horowitz. David Horowitz is a Berkeley grad, I believe, and then we were contacted by Bridge Cal, which is now under the umbrella of Bridge USA. Bridge USA says, listen, we're going to be having a debate on immigration. We're going to have the Cal Dems bring a liberal. We're going to have the Berkeley College Republicans bring a conservative on immigration. Noeed Thomas, I believe, suggested Ann Coulter at the time. So YAF went and sponsored Ann Coulter. These are actually promoting counter-speech culture, this Ann Coulter event. Regardless of what you think about her rhetoric, spiking the football in Ben Shapiro's case, I don't see an argument for that whatsoever, given his tendencies to be absolutely consistent on Trump's behavior. I have a hard time too when he says, holds up the Bible and says, this book's greater than the art of the deal. I have a hard time believing that as well. So, I don't think we're going to be spiking the football. I have, events lined up, 3 events, as I've told you, lined up already. We're not spiking the football. This is just to espouse conservative viewpoints.
Just to clarify, so the purpose in inviting Milo was because he was already going to be at college campuses and in the area, and it was a low-cost speaker?
Right, low-cost event. I mean, he had prominence. He was a Breitbart tech editor at the time. He was also, I mean, obviously you want your event, if you're going to be hosting an event, you want your event to fill up. And he is definitely one of those speakers who's going to fill your room. And I think the same can be said for Ben Shapiro, and they do not get along whatsoever. Milo Yiannopoulos sent a picture of a black baby to Ben Shapiro on the day of his child's birth and said, "You're a cuck, ha ha ha," and that's where the division happened. So Ben Shapiro actually used to be a Breitbart editor as well until he left because of Bannon and Milo. So I mean, both of these people are going to fill a room, and they have vastly different views.
We have another speaker.
I'm sorry?
We have another speaker.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hello. It's a bit tall for me. My name is Ray. I am a sophomore in LNS. I am not here representing any community. I'm just simply a concerned student who wants to voice my opinion specifically on 3 measures regarding the policy. I'm not going to talk about politics or anything like that because I feel like it's kind of taking us in another direction and distracting from some more important things. So 3 things in particular that really bothered me about the policy was the way in which a threat assessment was made and then the reaction to that. So essentially, if they're deciding that the police department, when they're reviewing the threat assessment, UCPD would essentially just elevate their police force instead of thinking about other alternative ways to deal with that threat. So then we have things like the Milo case where we have riot police and the shutdown of a building, which is really disruptive for a lot of student life and putting people in more danger than it needs to be. So my first issue that I'd like to address is sort of the increased threat assessment being met with an increased police force. Instead of that, it winds up costing the university a lot. It winds up putting students in danger. It winds up putting people who aren't even affiliated with the event who are just passing by in danger as well, because then there's a more likely chance for larger confrontation. So I would suggest either canceling an event if it gets to a point where they think it would be necessary to have police and riot gear there, or relocating it to a different venue. People aren't necessarily required, like it's not part of free speech to be allowed to speak in Zellerbach. Like we all know those people on Sproul who just come out and yell out there all the time. You have those wonderful vegan protesters who have the naked ladies and the dressed up as chicken, and we don't invite them to Zellerbach, right? And that's still, we're not impeding on their free speech. So if it winds up being a condition where we think that the students are threatened because there's going to be a confrontation, we are not obliged to host that speaker in that venue, even if they are going to pay for it, because it's going to harm more people than would be there at the event, and even those people who would be there at the event. So that's position number 1. Position number 2, as far as payment goes, because we've seen a lot of budget cuts to language departments, which is where one of my majors is, to other student groups, and things like that. And recently we've seen hikes in tuition for students passed by the ASUC to cover different financial aid costs. To me, it doesn't make sense for the university to be paying for really any sort of costs regarded to this. So if we are going to bring in police, if it's necessary to bring in police to Zellerbach, for instance, I don't think it makes sense that the university would be financing that. I think the speaker who would be coming should be the one who would be financing it, because they're a guest and they're not entitled to our resources the same way our students are, the same way our teachers are. Yeah. So if we had to pay UCPD more than we would pay them for just everyday costs, like if we're paying them overtime or because they're going to be working extra hours, then it would make more sense if we had the speaker who is coming, so not the student group, not the university paying for those extra security costs. And then thirdly, and this is to speak to the issue that happened this past fall, where we had areas in Cesar Chavez and areas in Eshelman and the student union building being shut down. I think if that is necessary for security purposes, that the venue should be relocated, because those are not only important places just for students to get together. In a way, they kind of act as like the millionth library that we have, because so many people study there. It's also home to many of our student organizations. It's home to ASUC, it's home to the DSP, it's home to the MCC, it's home to all these different things that are meant to be serving our student body. And when you're shutting that down, then they don't have access to those resources. Also, people tend to, professors of very large classes tend to use those spaces for testing as well. So for instance, this past fall, one of my friends was supposed to have a midterm there that had to get rescheduled because they had shut down the building. So if a speaker is going to be coming and going to be speaking in somewhere like Zellerbach, it doesn't make sense for them to be speaking there and have all of the surrounding buildings be shut down in order to host just one person. So that's my 2 cents.
Questions for the speaker? Thank you very much. Next speaker. If there are no other speakers, chairs, I believe we've, oh, do we have, sorry, didn't see you.
What do we do? Sign in? Hi there, everybody. My name is Derek Topper. I run the sports analytics group on campus, so obviously not a political group, but I have some issues with the policy that I would like to talk about, as well as some issues as a concerned student. You know, free speech is an important thing, and obviously I think that I speak for a lot of students that I've spoken to, you know, and just as well as myself, that, you know, a lot of these groups, whether it be the Trotsky or whatever it was called, as well as BCR and the Patriot, you know, I love to see these groups existing and to see these groups on our campus, you know, promoting their ideas, and that's the only way we're going to, you know, survive. Berkeley is a liberal echo chamber. You know, it's obviously, you know, we're one of the most politically liberal counties and places in, you know, the country, and it's really tough. You know, I consider myself a centrist, and a lot of times it's hard to express ideas that are, you know, even remotely to the right of center. You know, a lot of times people in Berkeley are, you know, like we've seen with BCR, they've been punched and kicked and had themselves attacked for just expressing their viewpoints, and that's not right. But at the end of the day, we need to keep these people, we need to allow them to bring the people they want to campus. You know, I don't agree with people like Milo. I don't agree with people like Ben Shapiro even, but these, and quite frankly, I think that the people that BCR bring to campus are provocateurs. I think that they're here to incite violence. But I think that without that, I think that, you know, we're setting a very dangerous precedent, and we're not putting ourselves in a situation where, you know, we can, I guess, you know, we can't really have that facilitation of discourse that we need to if we're going to be a developing campus. You know, and I'm sorry to you know, people like Ray or and, you know, plenty of students on this campus who feel harmed when you know, these speakers come out, but it's just a really tough thing, and I really think we need to bring these speakers to campus. That being said, I would like to talk about some of the other issues that were presented in the email that we didn't get to talk about. we certainly do need a centralized reservation system for all the facilities on this campus. It's very hard to, book any events just because you might not be able to get a space for that event and be able to get a space. The current system, as I foresee, as I know it with my sports analytics group, is we have a lot of trouble knowing when our events are going to happen, because we'll try to arrange an event, we'll work with the university, we'll book a room, and then we won't get approved for that room, and we won't be given a reason as to why, or we'll be told there were no rooms available at that time, and suddenly it's 2 days before the event and we thought everything was set. Some of the other things I think that a centralized reservation system for every facility would allow, not only my group, but more of the politically extreme groups on campus to be able to find spaces and understand the costs, without compromising, security. I also, regarding this, should students be able to serve as observers at major events? I think that they should. A lot of times, faculty and staff, don't want to put their necks out on the line due to, and I don't know this to be true, but I believe that a faculty and a staff would have a hard time, trying to support certain events that they don't necessarily agree with, and I just think that it would be much easier if someone like, the president of the two groups, the far left and the far right groups, were able to, serve as these observers. And lastly, as much as I hate to say it, I'm an out-of-state student, and I think that, the university has to cover the costs for these events. I agree that the event policy itself sounds fine, but, I think that in regards to the external security, when people protest, that is a university thing. I don't even necessarily think that the club should be required to pay for the internal security, but we as a university need to take on the responsibility. We're the free speech university, and if we're not going to protect our campus groups trying to bring free speech to this campus, then what are we? Cool.
Questions for the speaker?
Thank you so much for your statement. Actually, just building off of the last point that you made. So you were talking this whole time about sort of like this idea of facilitating discourse on campus. And again, I would strongly agree with you that this is really important. But then you're also talking about sort of speakers coming out and sort of the university protecting campus groups and campus groups' right to have speakers. But I want to make sure that we're noticing that these two things are actually separable, right? In order to facilitate discourse on this campus, there's a variety of things that the student groups themselves. This is maybe a question for the socialist group and the Republicans and the moderates and anyone else as well. There's the issue of, who should be allowed to come to campus, which of course has been the subject of this major events policy and all of this, and lots of hubbub, et cetera. But when it gets right down to thinking about how we could actually do a better job of building community and building this positive, discourse positive or dialogue positive environment on campus, what are you all invested in that? Is even a question, right? This is something I was wondering about as you were speaking. Is sort of like, well, yes, of course, like there's the issue of sort of protecting your own group's events and making sure that your own speakers can come. But beyond that, are you willing to invest in community? Are you willing to debate him? And are you willing to ask them, how do we get people talking to each other? You're giving thumbs up. Anybody who's involved at all as a student group? Does this happen already and I don't know about it?
So, just in terms of my own experience, I definitely feel like, a lot of times, so I tried to run for Senate last semester. It didn't quite work out due to a bunch of ASUC, I don't even know, but it was actually the most insane thing I've heard of. But one of my platforms when I was running for Senate was the idea that, why don't we try to facilitate this discourse? Why don't we try to, have these types of events and bring these types of events to campus? And one of the responses I received on Facebook was, how dare you? How dare you think that anybody should be forced to sit down in a room with these right-wing nut jobs? And that was literally word for word the quote. And I was just taken aback because, it's so tough when you have a very liberal populace like in Berkeley, and unless you've got these, and BCR, I think that they're doing a great job, although I do think that, like I said, that they're doing too much to be provocative. But they're fostering this community of conservative voices on this campus, and that's something that's needed. But it's an echo chamber. It's an echo chamber within a liberal echo chamber, and we're not getting this. I really don't think we're getting this facilitation of discourse. I really don't think that groups are coming together. I think that like Bradley even said, today he'd been called, or yesterday I believe he said he'd been called a Nazi 3 times. And I see BCR out on Sproul, talking to these people, but these people shout obscenities at them. They kick down their walls. And so I don't know. I just think that, personally, I think that a lot of like what both the extreme left and what the extreme right are saying is a load of hooey, but I think that I really would love to see groups come together, and I'd really love to see, I would totally go to an event like that.
So I'm wondering where you think this facilitation of dialogue, like on the behalf, the action of the university should begin. Do you think it should begin like with orientation? Should it begin in the classroom where we're making space for these, facilitating these discussions within the classroom and within events? Like, what do you think is the scope that the university should be involved in making sure this dialogue happens?
Sure. And I don't know if this is this particular committee, but I love the what Chancellor Christ has been doing so far. I think the events that she's been putting on have been great. There's free speech, bringing free speech and different speakers to campus that aren't just people like Ann Coulter or people like Milo Yiannopoulos. I think that when we can, I've always said that if we can bring, like people like John McCain, people like that are actually, either sitting Congress people or, former, people that have, like Frank Luntz would be a great example of somebody that would be lovely, would be great, a great Republican voice to bring to campus rather than somebody whose, sole goal it is to provide provocative natures. So I think the campus's responsibility should be to be putting on events, to be educating the public within the classroom. I think that a lot of times, I sit in class a lot. Whenever I'm sitting in class, for example, I'm in a class right now, and the topic is race. And I feel like a lot of the times, students are holding back on what they could be saying. They're trying to, if they're afraid that if they say something that offends somebody, then it'll lead to a whole, the whole class will come at them. And that's not something that I think is appropriate for this university. I don't think that that's something that we should have at this university. And quite frankly, I think that this is something that the campus should be working towards. And I really think that, I know Milo wanted to do that free speech week, but I think the campus should and do it as like just bringing actual speakers and trying to provide this education throughout, or through orientation, through every aspect and avenue that they can.
We have about 2 minutes left. Would anybody like to make any quick statements?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll make a very quick statement. I'm not going to take my entire time. Just one point. That is that this was brought up by Matthew, I believe, that is BCR and other Berkeley patriots trying to stir up, controversy? Are they trying purposely to spike the ball, as he said? I think Brad made it appropriately clear that that is not our intention. I was a member for some time of the Berkeley Patriot. I am a member fully active of the Berkeley College Republicans. And it was not our intention to stir up controversy. But the point I would like to make it, even if it was, that would make no legal difference. Even if it was our intention to be intentionally provocative, that would make no legal difference. You can still not censor any student organization that does that. Because even the most base provocateur who indulges in the least substantive dialogue, who only insults people or calls them out on any grounds, even that person serves the function of demarcating the lines we draw in society of what is acceptable opinion and what isn't. And that is something that is a function that even the worst provocateur can perform. That is one point. And as for are we ready to debate people on campus, of course we are. Berkeley College Republicans and the Cal Berkeley Democrats have hosted, I believe, 3 or 4 debates in the last year or so. I've taken part in all of them. They've been on the subjects of immigration, on executive amnesties, on taxation policies, environmental policies, wide-ranging discussions. So the idea that the two sides of this political spectrum have not been able to converse on major issues of public policy, that just simply isn't true. And it's reflected in the attitude of both these student groups. But I would just like to make this point clear again, that even if it was our intention to be provocative, you cannot censor us.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Can you tell me your name, please?
Rudra.
Rudra. Thank you. And I can appreciate what you're saying, because the principle of free speech in the most orthodox way is something that this university stands behind. The question I have for you is that, let's say hypothetically, even if it were meant to be provocative, how do you advise a university and the leadership of this university, myself included, to act in order to protect the lives of individuals if the words were to incite a riot? How do you avoid what happened in Charlottesville?
Okay, let me just
How would you advise the university? Practically, how would you advise?
So there's a legal distinction here. If there is an incitement to physical violence, that is protected. I mean, that is something that is not, sorry, it isn't protected. That is something that is a criminal offense. Okay, but that's an incitement to physical violence. We are hearing, we hear a number of speakers or a number of commentators, especially on this campus, including ASUC senators, who say that speech itself is violence of a kind. And I just have to say that, if you honestly hold to that viewpoint, then a university is really not the place for you. I believe that you should repeat your K through 12 education until you attain the intellectual maturity to function at an American institution of higher learning.
Rudra, I just want to follow up quickly, because we were talking in the hypothetical. You're saying even if the intent were to incite, let's stay in that, on that road. If the intent were to incite, so that inciting was really what was behind it, how do you advise the university? Because presumably, even if you want to incite, you don't want anyone killed. And so part of the university's response was to protect the lives of its students. What would you advise the university to do?
Yeah, so if there was an incitement of physical violence, then yes, the university has the right to refuse to host that speaker. But it's physical violence. That definition is intentionally narrow. It has to be physical violence, and it should be likely to produce that violence as well. So, yeah.
Well, I'd say in the context that she's asking the question, that at the rally itself, there were not people, no speaker got up and told the guy who drove the car into the young woman who lost her life, driving that car into that woman, where it's not an explicit incitement of violence. I think we're addressing what we know will be the reaction to a certain speaker. How do we, like she said, preserve life and safety of students when we know, no matter what the actual speaker is calling for, that there's likely to be violence. And it comes from both sides, as we saw with both people from both political spectrums, extremists being violent on our own.
Yeah, the answer to that was covered by Brad. And the idea is that the university can implement reasonable time, place, and location restrictions. Those restrictions can be imposed only if they are in a non-ideological manner that does not reflect the content of the speaker and does not change if the ideological persuasion of the speaker changes. So that is something that could be imposed. However, we do understand that this is Berkeley, and the reaction to a conservative speaker would be much more intense than it usually should be for a liberal speaker, regardless of how far left you are, if you're like modern Democratic Party left or Trotskyite left. It still would not be as intense as it would be to even a mainstream conservative like Mr. Shapiro.
Thank you very much, everybody, for the lively session. The open comment period is now closed. If you are not a member of the commission, we ask that you You now depart. The commissioners will sit for another hour or so and debrief over what we just heard. Thank you very much.